Okay, Amos, are we ready to go?
Yeah, we're good to go.
And are folks able to see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Baxter Board Meeting of June 2nd. To begin, I would like to invite everyone to join me in a moment of silence. More than 100,000 people have lost their lives in the past, I can't even remember how many months, in our country alone. 100,000 lives in the U.S. alone to COVID-19, and this illness is disproportionately affecting people of color across the world. The events of our nation that our nation has witnessed in the last few weeks, and the senseless killing of George Floyd and many others, remind us that racism and injustice pervade our society. The fact that racism is deeply embedded within institutions designed to protect us, educate us, and to take care of us when we are ill makes us acutely aware that we must stand together in solidarity against racism, not only now, but always. So please join me in a moment of silence to remember those affected by the pandemic and victims of injustice. Thank you very much. Again, welcome to the meeting. For those of you that I have not had the opportunity to meet, I'm Patty Oldmixon. I am the board chair. I'd like to welcome my colleagues from the board, Christian Sparling, the vice chair, Peter Montano, our treasurer, Ruth Dean, the secretary, and members at large, Thorne Dickinson and Nick Cheroff. We also have with us tonight Kelly Pryor, the executive director at Baxter Academy, Cece Poe, the incoming interim head of school, who will start at Baxter on July 1st, and members of the Maine Charter Commission. Tonight's agenda is short. We will be presenting an update on the budget process, the teacher contracts, and then we'll go to public comment. Okay, we've been discussing the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic is having on the Maine economy, state revenues, and as a result, funding to Baxter. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Bob Kautz, the executive director of the Maine Charter School Commission. Bob, would you mind coming off mute and providing a little context to our community about how school funding can be affected by an economic downturn, and why this is particularly concerning for charter schools?
Good evening. Thank you for asking me to give that context. The Maine Charter School Commission over the last month has held meetings with each of our charter schools. By the way, I'm Bob Kautz, Executive Director for the Charter Commission. We've held meetings with all of our schools to talk with them about finances, financial management, all because we're concerned with the fact that the greatest reason for failure of a charter school is financial mismanagement or financial problems. And that try to help them to be able to analyze the reports that they get from the state, insofar as funding, future funding, the issue of having the appropriate numbers of enrollment when there's forecasts of funding, items like that. To get to more the situation we have here, Baxter, like all the other charter schools, received a form called ED 279 from the state back in February or January, in which it gave a figure as to how much Baxter might receive. It's an allocation, and an allocation is not a guarantee of funding. An allocation is the amount that you would receive, but that could be altered by the figures that each one of the schools send into the state, or it could be altered by the state not having the revenues to fund it. So there's a little section on each one of those 279s that has a statement like what I just made, probably in a better words than I use, but that's the gist of what is there. And it isn't intended to mean you can be guaranteed that you'll receive it. Now, and since that allocation amount, the ED 279, was made, we've had the advent of the COVID virus and the impact on the nation's economy, our state's economy. And we felt as a commission that charter schools should respect the fact that the revenues are being affected. And that effect is going to be something that will predictably affect the funding of schools. Since charter schools are entirely funded by the state based upon their enrollment, we have no idea how any reductions in funding for education would be imposed on or affected the charter schools' own amounts that they would receive. Charter schools, in receiving money only from the state, have no opportunity to go to their taxpayers and ask them to raise additional funds, local additional funds, for the purpose of taking care of any shortfalls that occur from budget cuts, less revenue, etc. And so therefore, it's even more important that charter schools be prepared to be able to deal with what might be I think it's a very predictable cut in funds. So we advise them to take a look at different financial models of reductions of 10%, 15%, 20%, and in fact even said go so far as how far can you go in reductions before you have broken the school, and said that to take a look at those and come back to where you are comfortable, where you think you could survive a reduction without materially affecting the school. And we actually said we thought 15% was probably the amount that it might be good. Now that's more of an educated guess on our part. It's not something that we know from any sources at the state level as to what in fact is going to be the reductions, if there are any reductions. I mean, that's not assured, but I don't know who amongst us would say, I'd bet on that. I'd put $100 bet on it that it's going to be fully funded. I wouldn't. And the commission as itself did not feel that you want to take a bet on that. Now, we know that in the operation of schools, I was a superintendent of schools for 30 years, 20 of them here in the state of Maine. And I've been through situations where the state has reduced funding. And I've seen firsthand the effect and had to work at how we would change our budget midstream, right in the middle of the year, to be able to accommodate that loss of revenue. It's not easy and it's not pretty. And it is something that really gets everybody upset, appropriately so, because people have things about the school and what the school is delivering that they feel is key and important. But those who were running the school, I as superintendent, the school boards that I were working with, we had to make decisions that were going to take care of the best that we could see for all the students. And it wasn't that we liked making those decisions. It is easier in some ways to make reductions now in your budget rather than budgeting to that full amount in the ED 279, which is only an allocation, not a guarantee of payment. That it's better now to make reductions, and then if it is enough for the year, you're in good shape. If it's not enough for the year, well, at least you've reduced it 10%, and if it's 15%, you're only reducing 5%. Now, when you set your budget, that doesn't mean that you're immediately going to spend it all, but when you start up a school year, you spend more of your money and you make financial commitments for the year, contracts with teachers, contracts for transportation, contracts for heating. You have the obligations for the year that you're going to have to pay. And if your amount is cut and you've got those obligations set, you haven't got a whole lot of choices in which you can reduce to meet the shortfall of funding. So we think it's prudent and very prudent to make those kinds of reductions in this budget now, make the kinds of commitments that that budget will allow. And well, you hope that's enough. And also you hope even more that maybe it is more than we needed to do. We can use some of it to do some things that we had eliminated. But that's not a promise, because you don't know until you get your amount, see what your obligations are, and see where you sit. And so I think what has been done here, where you're all going to be talking about a budget which I think was a reduction of 10%, not the 15 that we had recommended. And by the way, we didn't dictate. This is up to each one of the schools as to what they're going to do. We just tried to explain our thinking, which is akin to what I've just said, for each of them to consider in moving ahead. And I'm happy to answer any quick questions and elaborate further if you want, but I think I've covered the introduction to this.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Bob. We really appreciate you providing that additional context. It's a different model than what many people are used to, where they've sent their kids to perhaps their public school, and the funding has a little bit more flexibility than we have with the charter school. So we appreciate that perspective.
Thank you, Patty, and you're right. That local additional amount that just about every school district has on their warrant for funding of education is based upon the property tax of that community. And you can increase more than what you're obligated to raise in order to receive your full state aid. If you don't raise all that you're supposed to, the amount of state aid you get gets reduced. But if you want to raise even more than that, local communities can do it. If you look at the per pupil amount that's raised for students in the areas just right around Portland, you'll see great variance in which what they're receiving, and because of the added local and what they're receiving from the state and what they're required to raise. They may be raised up to $14,000, $15,000 per student, whereas at the charter schools, you're getting just the EPS amount per school, per student, which is in the range of $7,000 or $8,000 for a high school education. So charter schools, if you look at the state per pupil spending, you'll see that charter schools are in the group of the lowest per pupil spending per child, per student, because that's all the charter schools have received. It is a very tough struggle for charter schools to be able to provide everything that they're required to do, and yet not have available to the child that amount of money that they might have had per student in their home school.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bob. Okay, so in the spirit of transparency, we shared the budget guidance that we received from the Charter Commission with the union team on May 7th during our collective bargaining session. And then on May 12th and May 19th, we held 2 public meetings to explain the situation that we were facing, the work that we're doing to meet the budget shortfall, and to share our concern with the community that we will likely need to eliminate positions from the administration as well as the teachers. There are 2 other dates that are important to highlight. May 1st is when we proactively sought input from teachers regarding their intentions to return to Baxter in the fall. This was good planning. It was well before we knew anything was happening with the budget, but it was just our efforts to be planful so that we knew when we got to September approximately how many people were planning to be there. On May 27th is another deadline that I just wanted to point out. That's the date that we need to issue contracts to employees for next year. We have a commitment to notify teachers 90 days before the return to school. We also disclosed that we would be looking to use attrition to fill the gap. If that wasn't enough, we'd be required to make staff reductions in both teachers and administration. This is the slide that was presented both at the May 12th meeting and then again at the May 19th meeting. I just want to pause here for a second and talk about a framework that I think might help to put things into perspective in the situation. The decisions of the board and the administration were not an action that we took, but merely a reaction to the situation. We have a budget crisis. We informed our community. We have a requirement to send out contracts to returning teachers. No one offered solutions, suggestions, so we did what was our fiduciary responsibility, which is to react and to close that budget gap. Now that we're all working together, we're looking forward to sharing in that work. We're welcoming additional insight, perspectives, and thought partnership, reacting to this budget crisis. It is my recommendation as the board chair to the board that we meet with the union to discuss how to close the gap. Although we're pausing on teacher layoffs until we hold our discussions with the union and review the feedback from the community tonight, we thought it was important to walk through the process that we followed, as we want to ensure that the community has visibility to what we did, as we may find ourselves in a similar situation after meeting with the union. As Bob outlined in his comments, Baxter funding is based on state revenues. Unfortunately, Baxter is ineligible for COVID relief funds as we have funding to cover our current salary expenses. Any loans that we were to receive would not be forgivable and would add to our current debt, which is a violation of our debt covenants. I know that's a question that's come up quite a few times, and we can talk about it more if necessary. We did model a 10% reduction. We hope that the actual funding from the state is not higher than 10%, but this is where we thought we could start. So that's a $448,000 reduction in the budget. In light of the exigent circumstances, so the pandemic and its impact on the economy, the late-breaking budget guidance from the Charter Commission, and the 90-day contract deadline, we determined that the reduction in force decision was not subject to negotiation with the union, although impact to employees is part of negotiation. When we made that decision, we were relying on the status quo, which is the existing employee handbook, which has a layoff and reduction in force provision, and we followed it. We acted in good faith, and we have been and remain prepared to negotiate the impact of the decision over the wages, hours, and working conditions. But as I said earlier, we're happy to partner with the union to solve these problems should the board, when we go into executive session after this meeting and can talk about this, agree with my recommendation. On the administrative side, we've received some feedback that we should have reduced this team. For a school that serves 415 students with 31 educators, having an administrative team of 9 people is far leaner than our peer schools. There is a transition process happening between our current head of school and the incoming head of school. And there are a lot of moving parts and ideas around the best way to organize the faculty and administration. We had not yet worked out all of those details. As a reminder, CC does not join the Baxter community formally until July 1st. So the accounting for the puts and takes of the administrative positions is a little fluid. For example, blending roles, eliminating roles, and staffing roles. Ensuring that we have someone who's providing faculty and student support is top of mind. We'd like to take a moment to share an updated version of a slide that was presented back in August of last year. We received feedback that many folks do not have a clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities that are assigned to the executive director, the head of school, and the assistant principal, the role that I just mentioned a moment ago. So I hope that folks can take a look at this and get a better understanding of what each of them are responsible for. Some community members have emailed the board suggesting that we eliminate or scale back the role of the executive director. It is the board and the Charter Commission's opinion that the running of a $4 million nonprofit organization requires an executive director. Great charter schools have closed in this country, not because they don't have good teachers or wait lists or outcomes for students, but because of financial mismanagement, as Bob just mentioned. We are executing our fiduciary responsibility to preserve Baxter's ability to make good on its promise. I'm proud to say that just this week, an innovative and entrepreneurship thought leader called Baxter Academy a quote national treasure. Our work is always aimed at protecting this treasure for our students, our community, and our state. In conclusion, I just want to summarize that we all acknowledge we are living in unprecedented times. We're doing our best to keep Baxter strong for the students, its mission, and its community. We respect everyone and love what they love about Baxter, but we need to act to protect the school's mission to safeguard its future. We know that these have not been easy choices, but we look forward to working together to react to that situation we're facing so that we will have a strong Baxter moving forward. So now what I would like to do is we'll open the chat box to comments and questions. There are over, I think, 150 people on the call right now. So I think that that's the best way. It makes it a little bit more manageable. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat box to Amos. Amos will read all of the questions and we will endeavor to answer them as succinctly as possible. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, so first question we've got is from Clara Porter, and she says, "Can you start with the questions submitted?"
So there were about 25 to 28 questions submitted by some representatives of the parents. Rather than going through a list of those questions, I think we should open it up to the community, and then when we run out, we'll go through all of those as well. Does that sound reasonable?
Deirdre asks, how did BA decide who to cut based on seniority?
Sure, I can cover that for us. So what we did was we took a look back at, and it's funny because I went back and forth about whether we should go through that or not go through that tonight, but I'm happy to talk to it. We went back to the original charter agreement that we had with the state, and actually, so if you could just bear with me 1 second. All right. So we looked at what was in the original charter application and its focus on core programming that we would need to deliver the rigorous STEM education. That was all part of the mission. And here's the reference in the charter application. And this is where we came up with the fact that we were going back to the original foreign language requirements and the same approach to physical education. So I want to reiterate, those cuts were based on the position and the programs. They were not based on people who fill the position or their roles, that they are playing in people's lives. It was all about the program, and then that's what drove the reduction of individuals' positions.
Angie Taylor asks, Portland allowed public comments via mic. Why not Baxter?
Well, I would say that the people of Portland school system maybe are better at managing 150 people in a Zoom call. To me, this is an efficient way to try to get through all of the questions.
Right. This next one's a little bit long. The person, Alex Willett, did put it, send it to everyone, so you can read along in the chat if you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and read it here. It says, note this was written before the meeting. Will someone address the blatant disrespect expressed towards the teachers this past week? In an email sent out on 5/30/20, it was stated, we understand that any decision will cause pain and destruction. Well, it is understandable that in a time like this, reductions in force had to be made. The execution in which it was shared to the general public is unacceptable. Every teacher that has left in the past year has gotten a goodbye and thank you email addressed to the whole school. But this past week, the teachers who were fired not because of disciplinary issues, but because of a global pandemic and an economic crisis, have not had anything said about them, not even the dignity of being thanked for their dedication to Baxter. This action holds not only blatant disrespect towards the staff of this school, but towards the students it teaches. The level of uncertainty and anger these actions have caused are inexcusable and unwarranted.
It would look to Kelly. Would you like to address that?
I think that the emails that have gone out in the past week were merely informing the community of where we were starting. And the people who have been impacted by these budget cuts are still part of our community and will be through the end of August. So while these cuts are new and something that we had to announce, we are far from completing our relationship with them, and this was merely informing the community of the direction that we were taking. Certainly, each of these people is worth celebrating and will be celebrated as we move through this process.
Brianne Lucy asks, I heard you say that the school is hitting pause on layoffs. I haven't heard this. Can you explain?
Well, it's my recommendation, and I can only speak for myself. So there's a bit of process that has to take place. We have a public board meeting right now, and then we will go into executive session to have a conversation about bargaining with the union about how to go about closing the budget gap. I'm not authorized as an individual to say that we are able to do that. So what we will do is we will leave this this WebEx or Meet open. We will leave, go into executive order, and then we will come back and have a further dialogue about bargaining. My goal, my thought, as I said, is I think that we should hit pause on the termination or the layoffs of the affected teachers until we can meet with the union. So, but I'm not able to. It's a little squishy. Sorry, I'm not allowed to say that we are going to do things until we meet, but we couldn't meet before this meeting. So I hope that you will give us the benefit of a little bit of time, a couple hours.
Karen Freem asks, could we see the slide that shows the role of admin, and please explain the roles of the others who are part of admin?
I'm sorry, Karen, the role of admin and
the roles of admin, and please explain the roles of the others who are part of administration.
So I could take a shot at this, Kelly, or if you want to.
I'm happy to explain.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so so you've seen the slide that Patty, are you able to put it back up?
I'm just not sure which slide.
The breaks down the administrative responsibilities.
Oh, yes, thank you. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
This one?
Yes, thank you. So in Baxter's world, we have a nonprofit supporting the school itself. The executive director has executive authority for the organization and really mission keeping and making sure that the school stays in alignment with that. Its obligations to the charter contract, as well as its stated intentions and expectations for the students. Communications, strategic alliance building, budget and finance, and compliance at many levels. Everything from federal, state, to our loan and its covenants. The head of school, it leads the work of the school itself. So leading the work for teacher supervision and evaluation, budget management for the school and its programming, professional and curriculum development, and coordination of education compliance and opportunity. And of course, there's much more to that job, but it is augmented in this new model that we're pursuing with an assistant principal. The assistant principal combines both student-facing and faculty-facing support in maintaining a positive, healthy, and diverse school culture, holistic discipline, and instructional leadership. Beyond those three roles, we have a CFO who manages everything from payroll to Flex Friday budget lines, individual student project lines. So there's a lot of moving money at Baxter because of our real world model, and all of that along with all of the accounting and bookkeeping falls to Carrie Bush, the CFO. You see Amos here as our IT, our whole IT department in one human. We also have a whole operations department in one human, and that's Tyler Boyer, who came on to do facilities and transportation, among other things, but is now being called upon to help with communications, the logistics of all of that. Also doing a lot of heavy lifting around graduation. Also doing heavy lifting around graduation is Anna Gervais, who is a student services coordinator, but has also been handling our very legally complex enrollment process and admissions. She's been coordinating student records and registrar duties. The work of multiple people in other schools, multiple departments in other schools fall to her. We also have Denise with them in the front office manager, who is wrangling all of the attendance data that is so important for our school as we move into compliance. It has direct impact on compliance. And last but certainly not least is Laura Parks, who is our director of special education. And she oversees the entire special education department and guides its planning and its execution on its responsibilities. And I did this off the top of my head, so if I left anyone out, please let me know. But I just want to say that this team of people is a remarkable team of people. In the last year, we have lost members of the team who have also done heavy lifting and will not be replaced because of the budget cuts. Heather DiPolito leading community outreach and partnerships, and all of the important work that went on with that, from fundraising to building partnerships, internships for the students. These are roles that will not be replaced. And I have spent time researching the admin capacity of other schools, and Baxter's is about 46 students to every one admin, and the closest other school I've seen is 33 students to one admin, but I've seen them in Portland where they are 3 to 1, 3 students to a single admin. So we are a very, very lean operation, and with these cuts, the people I've mentioned here tonight will and are already taking on more of the tasks, more of the responsibilities related to running block and tackle for the instructional team, so that those people in the classrooms can teach. Thank you.
We expect those to have the same environment.
I think we lost Amos there, Patty.
Oh, I think can you guys hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Just lagged out for a second. Emily McCool asks, can we expect the world language standard to have the same requirements?
I think that what we need to focus on is the fact that we're not sure at this point what positions will be going. So if this is part of a conversation with the union, we don't know. Will the negotiated approach still be the way that we approached the conversation or the assessment? So although I'm happy to try to answer as many questions as possible about particular roles or classes, I'm not sure if that's still going to be the positions that are how we close the funding gap.
Ross asks, what considerations have been given to aggressive fundraising campaigns?
So I think fundraising campaigns are part of what we would love to see the executive director focus on, as well as the Baxter Parents Association. We have not had the bandwidth to approach and do a capital campaign as we had hoped, based on other things going on at the school that we were trying to manage through. The goal would be to have a situation where we can approach a funding campaign or fundraising campaign next year. But as we've talked about in the budget meetings, we're all very worried about the sources of funds for donations, given the 40 million people who are on unemployment and the increase in the unemployment statistics in the United States. We're a little worried that is going to suffer. I know that the Baxter Parents Association did a great job working to raise funds, and we'll look to partner with them again as we move forward.
Adam Runnels asks, what is Kelly Pryor's salary this year, and why is she important for our school?
Sure. Freedom of Information Act. I don't remember the number exactly off the top of my head. I think it's around $90,000. She is important to the school because of all of the things that we just highlighted: keeping the mission, communication, strategy, alliance, building, planning, just the role of overseeing the budget and the financial management of the school. I know we have a finance person, but that person is responsible for the day-to-day activities. Kelly is accountable for it, and making sure that we have met the financial obligations that we have of our debt covenants is a big part of that role. It's not a part-time job. The other thing is the requirements for compliance and tracking our activities and our state mandated guidelines is a lot of work. Christian, perhaps you'd like to speak to this. I know that you have worked a lot with Kelly on this work.
I'd love to add just something just to keep in mind. When you think of a traditional district, there is both the administration that leads the school and then the central office that leads the district. And when you are a charter school, you are both the school and the LEA, the local education administration. So the school has both of those responsibilities. And so a major part of the executive director role is what you see in a district office that supports an entire school district. It's not just the day-to-day runnings of teaching and learning in a single building between teachers and students. It's also all the compliance, finance, management that goes along with that. And that is quite a bit of work. And it's not as a lot of it is being done by Kelly, and a lot of it is done by her team. And so I would just say, there's a lot of questions I see in the chat that hint at, what is this executive director role? I mean, we've had emails that said, why don't we just cut the executive director role? And I think I just want to give clarity to the enormous list of annual responsibilities and daily responsibilities that go along with that role. It's a lot. It's big. It is both the running of the school and the running of a district at the same time, while also trying to play a major role in shaping how charter schools in Maine work together. Baxter Academy is a leader among all charter schools in Maine, doing a lot of the things that we need to do with regard to lobbying, working with the Maine Charter Commission, etc., so that we can advocate for our needs as a school. Because we have, there's only a few charter schools in Maine. We have a limited voice, and we've played Kelly has played a significant role in that. So I just want to address when people say, like, what does she do all day? What is the importance of this role? Why can't we cut it? I just want to, for people who had come with that perspective, like, I assure you that the role is monstrous. There's a lot to it. And there's a lot that we have to work with as a board with the executive director role in communication with the state and with the charter commission. That is huge. It's a lot. And our ability to operate is on the line.
I'd also like to add that between the years of 2012 and 2018, Kelly Pryor, under her leadership, brought in over $2 million to Baxter in contributions beyond what we get from the state. And I sure appreciate that heavy lift.
That's a great point. Oops. Sorry, mute management. That's a great point, Ruth. I think the other part that we, forget about is all of the work that to get us into the current school that we're at, the physical location, that had to be managed by somebody. All of the debt that we took on, all of the facilities, the assessment, working with our treasurer and our legal team to figure out how we could fund a location. Other public schools have school buildings. They don't have to worry about these things. I know that's an example from a couple years ago, but if you think about taking that position, I'd like to talk more about positions and less about people, because all of the decisions that we should be making are about the job functions that are going on. So if you take that position out of the mix, who would have orchestrated and pulled together a move like that? They could not have fallen to a head of school or a dean of students or a team of teachers even. Those are the kinds of things that go unnoticed sometimes when you're not in the thick of it. And so we just wanted to point some of those out. You miss?
All right. Casey Gadloff asks, with around 38,000 French-speaking households and around 11,000 households that mainly speak Spanish versus around 3,000 households that speak Mandarin Chinese, how is it justifiable to cut the Spanish and French programs versus the Mandarin program?
I'm going to defer that to one of the people who was here at the beginning of the Baxter adventure, Ruth or Kelly.
I will just jump in and say, and Ruth can augment if she wishes. Mandarin was identified as the language that is internationally important in STEM fields, and so it was. And it's also a language that is not offered in a lot of public schools in the state of Maine. So it's a very valuable program for us to offer, and it has been a big draw at the school because it is an excellent program, and it does set students up well for STEM professions, and so that's why it was central to the design of the school. Ruth, do you want to add anything?
Oh, I would just say that if we had an excess of funding, we'd have teachers for all the things we wanted. We really would. But when we were doing the initial charter, we knew we would be on a tight budget, and we chose Mandarin because of the engineering and science connection with Mandarin as the one that we would prioritize.
Amos?
So I'm having a slight technical difficulty. My Zoom just reconnected, and I lost some of the chat questions. Do you guys still have them up in your window?
Yep, so I have the ones that went to the group chat that we can go through, and I'm happy to read through those.
Yeah, if you don't mind, if you submitted one to me personally by private chat, if you could just submit that again. If I haven't gotten to that, I apologize for that.
Okay, no problem. So Amy Anderson writes, are you assuming Baxter won't qualify for ESSER funding, or has Baxter applied and been denied? If applied, when did you apply for ESSER funding, ESSER funding? Peter? Peter, you're on mute.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
I know we did look into the PPP loans and the other COVID money that was out there. We are not eligible for it because we did not have a dip in revenue during the first quarter of this year. And we have to certify, when you accept the money, you have to certify that you actually have a need for it. The issue that Baxter has and other nonprofits that are funded by the government and also state government is that when a recession like this hits, it doesn't necessarily hit the nonprofit world or the government entities like it does the business community. There's a lag time. The lag time is usually 6 to 9 months because of it's got to work through the system. So, and what I mean by that is a loss of jobs means less revenue for federal and state governments. Therefore, they need to cut the monies they give back to the nonprofit community and local governments or the schools. So our lag time is 6 months from now, 9 months from now. So a lot of the stuff that's out there that's been made available for the schools, and for the for-profit community doesn't apply to us, or we're unable to apply to it.
You're on mute, Patty.
You're on mute, Patty.
Sorry, I'm trying to be polite. This is from Will Peterline, and I apologize if I said that incorrectly. What about outsourcing to other companies for donations / extra funding? Baxter is big in the STEM field, and companies would probably be happy to help funding. Kelly, you want to take this?
Sure. That's what we thought too, Will, and we've been very hopeful about it, and we continue to hope that someday it will change. Maine is a very small state in terms of the entities that are available to fund extra things in the state, and it's also a very fair-minded state. So what we've run up against again and again is the idea that if you give funds to one school, you have to give it to all schools. We are trying to make the case that Baxter is a regional resource, and that it makes things available to students in our region that would not otherwise be available if we did not exist, if the school did not exist. And so we are trying to demonstrate this by all of the work that we do in the community. Both through middle school programs, that STEM outreach in the schools surrounding Baxter, and also with our Boys and Girls Club programming that we do after school. We're always looking for ways to demonstrate our willingness and our desire to be part of the community and to make our resources at the school redound to the benefit of our entire community. So we're hopeful that someday it will change and that there will be STEM industry support for our school. but as of yet, we have not enjoyed that. But we continue to work on it, and it's important.
Great. Grace Gorman writes, how is Baxter planning on educating students on consent, mental health, and coping skills in an effective way with teachers who are uneducated on these issues without accurate training? What trainings will you be provided? How much will this cost to train teachers in these topics? Cece, do you want to address this? Cece?
I'll need to unmute her.
Oh, please, yes.
Yeah, let me do that. One moment.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for including me. I look forward to joining everybody fully come July. I think what, Patty, you asked me is how to handle education given the shifts. I don't have the answers to everything. I've only just this past month had a chance to spend group time and one-on-one time with all of the faculty. I think there's a tremendous amount of disappointment with the shifts and the reductions proposed. But what I can say is I've met with an advisory of students who have spoken really, really highly of faculty. And when I speak to teachers, there's a clear commitment to student health and wellness that doesn't take away the feelings of sadness and of loss. I've had a chance to talk to SB and just have tremendous respect for the passion and the work that she has brought to Baxter. Had a chance to talk to Jordan and to Megan. And I feel, along with many of you, the huge importance of world language, especially at a time when we're so isolated from each other, and conflict management and resolution is so important for making our world a better place. Now, can we do it? Whatever the union and the board deliver to me to inherit on July 1st, I know we can all work together to make and continue an excellent Baxter education. The reductions are super tough, but I have every optimism that with this amazingly dedicated staff and talented kids, that we're going to continue to do great things for all of those students. So I don't have a definitive answer, but I have great optimism and trust in the people who I've met so far.
Thank you, Cece. From Emma Crispin, firstly, a comment. You are shifting the blame away from the administration. Accept some fault here. Okay. Secondly, why did you choose to terminate instead of furloughing? Even though you have said multiple times that nothing is set in stone. Thirdly, can you explain to us what % salary cuts administration is taking? That's a hint. The answer is that you should all be taking salary cuts. So multiple layers in that question. So let me take a stab at it, unless somebody else would like to. I'm not trying to shift blame to or from anyone. I don't think there's any blame to be had. That we're in a difficult situation. We made decisions and we are owning those decisions, and now we're trying to work together with the community to make even better decisions. So we're trying to work with what we have. Number two, the choice between furloughing and termination. I believe is a furlough is more of a short-term situation, and our budget is for a full school year. So I believe that the process of furloughing someone would be if we were going to have them not work for, say, 4 weeks, as opposed to if our budget is the way our budget is looking like it's going to be according to the charter commission, we will not have funding for these positions for the whole school year. Peter, if you have a difference of opinion or a different answer, please let me know.
No, I certainly agree with you. And, you know, as we built this budget, we looked at every place where we can reduce cost. And actually, you do actually bring up a really good point. You know, and this is something that will actually go to us negotiating with the BEA. If the teachers across the board are willing to take a 6% cut in pay, we would be able to keep all the teachers on. Again, so, you know, we're going to go back, we're going to talk with the BEA and put everything on the table and see what we can come up with. You know, that's, I don't know what else to do, but I know we do need a balanced budget. We're required to have that. And if there was a way for us to come up with the additional money, believe me, we would have done it by now.
Yep. And I think the last question that Emma asks is around the salary cut that the administration is taking. So as I recall, we are freezing salaries, and at this point, we have not reduced salaries, but that's part of what we will go into in the next conversation. Renee, oops, sorry, I just scrolled too far. Sorry, hold please. Renee Schwalberg asks, I understand that a large nonprofit organization needs an executive director. I'm on the board of a nonprofit, and a major responsibility of the administration and the board is fundraising. And it looks like we got cut off.
It continues later on and says, can you describe the board and Kelly's role in fundraising?
Okay, I think that we've addressed that. Christian, would you say? Okay. Cecilia's nodding or shaking her head saying, no, we haven't addressed that. I'm not sure. You know, we need to do more fundraising. We need to get the school to the point where we're putting out less fire drills and doing more proactive planning. And that's on our radar of good work to be done.
It's not correct.
So,
Peter, at the past two board meetings, you gave a great explanation as to why the cautions against relying on fundraising given the financial circumstances ahead. Can you just repeat what you've said in the past two meetings?
Yeah, well, majority of my consulting I do is in the nonprofit community, and fundraising in the current environment that we're in is going to be actually more difficult. There's going to be less dollars coming from the federal government to the nonprofit sector, which means the dollars that are currently out there that are coming from individuals and companies are going to be stretched further than they currently are. Plus, we will also see a reduction in those dollars as many of those companies are experiencing decreases in revenue and having to lay off their own people, during this period of time. So to rely on fundraising to close the gap at this point, unless the money is sort of what I would say in the bank, you really can't count on it. I know in the past we have raised a considerable amount of money over the last 6 years to get the school up and running. Approximately $2 million have been raised over the last 6 or 7 years. And even with the current debt load that we have, there is going to be another $700,000 of debt forgiveness at the end of 3 years. So the school and under Kelly and under the rest of the administration has done an outstanding job raising money. It's just that we're just in really tough times right now. So, if we had the money or were able to raise it and we had it in the bank, we wouldn't be in this situation. But again, I mean, we can't raise taxes. We're kind of locked into the money we're going to expect to get from the state. We went with a 10% reduction. We were advised to go higher than that, but I'm optimistic that hopefully the numbers that were projected for the state losses will not be as great. And I know originally we were banking on the state losses were originally projected to be 1.2 billion. And that would have meant that we should have budgeted a 15% reduction and not a 10% reduction. We went with 10, thinking that hopefully that number won't be as high. And I know just last week the state came out with a projection of just south of 600 million. So it was much less than the original number. So that actually falls more in line with the 10% reduction that we did do. So we took a shot at, taking our best guess and also hoping the number wouldn't be as big. So, what's going to happen in the next 2 months, we don't know. The state may come back. I know they're supposed to meet over the next month or two to go over where they think the projections will be and how that will affect, the schools and everyone else. If you think about it, the state budget, about 35% of the money that's raised by the state goes into education. It's one of the education and DHHS. I think that's probably another 35 or 40%. So the bulk of the money comes to these two organizations, and that's where we're going to see a bulk of the funding cuts over the next 6 to 9 months. So we're trying to be, we're trying to look ahead. We have to make sure that the school stays financially stable, not only for this year, but for years to come. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, we have about 144 more questions, which I know that people may be frustrated that we're not doing live questions, but I think it's hard enough to handle the reading of the questions and answering them and keeping the meeting moving. So I hope that people will understand. I'm trying to skip down. Spanish teachers. So again, Grace's question is really around the classes that we had talked about reducing. And I think we should skip this and we'll table this question for a future meeting based on what outcome there might be of any negotiation with the union. A second request to address the questions that were submitted by the parents. Cecilia, I understand that the parents have a lot of questions, but I have 157 questions here. So if we don't get them answered I'm just concerned that we need to answer the questions that people are asking in the meeting. So I think we should talk about that, how we can handle it differently in the future. Margie says, the slides you shared are helpful. They slipped by a little faster than I was able to read. Would you please email them? Thank you. Yes, we will email those out tomorrow. We will. Angie writes, my belief is that the administration has not followed the board's direction in making staff reductions at this time. The board approved a plan that gave a targeted number of staff cuts in both administration and the faculty. The plan stated clearly that attrition would be used where possible. Given that faculty only received their contract for next year this past week, and we have not hit the deadline for them to be returned yet, it is impossible to know yet whether there are any faculty that are not planning to return. An informal poll on returning faculty is not the same thing as a signed contract. That means it is impossible to know what attrition you might be facing. Mike continues. My request is in line with Patty's suggestion that the administration slow this process down and go back to the drawing board. Honor the board's vote by letting attrition be the first driver of the decision making. In this extra time, involve other stakeholders in these conversations to look at other possibilities to balance the budget. That's a great idea, Angie. That's what we were trying to do by sharing the information about the impending situation. We're happy to have an opportunity to go back. I will say it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg. So we had to offer everyone their contracts within 90 days of returning to returning to school in the next semester. And if we didn't do that, then we'd be wrong at not providing contracts to the people who were not going to be continued for the next year. So there is no right answer. We tried the best that we can. We're trying. We'll continue to try, and we'll continue to work with the teachers and the union to try to figure out a better solution. So Ross says, what considerations have been given to aggressive fundraising campaigns? I'm a current student at Hampshire College. We're facing many of the same exact issues. We found the best course of action is to fundraise instead of making cuts to the school that will inevitably cut the legs off the metaphorical table. I understand your question, Ross. I think we've talked a lot about fundraising. So in the spirit of trying to get to the 194 remaining questions, I'm going to keep moving. Lonnie writes, shouldn't it be one of our goals as a STEM school to keep improving? Why then are we going back to our original school model, which was changed for a reason? Because we don't have the funds to do everything that we had the opportunity to expand to. So we had an original model, we had additional funds, especially when we increased the number of students. It increased our funding, and so we were able to add additional opportunities at the school, whether it was programs or classes. Now we're at the point where we need to constrict, and so we'll need to figure out how are we going to balance the budget. Laura says, based on the listings on serving schools on May 1st, there were multiple teaching positions open. Were those additional positions in the 2020-21 budget? How did simply not hiring those new teachers provide the budget relief needed if those salaries were part of the budget? So as of May 1st, we were operating on the assumption that our funding was going to come in at the expected rate. We also had been hearing that, some teachers were planning on leaving the school. And so we were trying to mitigate the risk. So no one was going to be hired if we didn't have an open position, but it's always good to have that process moving so that you have what we call a bench of potential employees if people chose not to come back to Baxter. One of the challenges is if teachers choose not to come back, which everyone chooses that at some point, if it happens in late August or September, we're really in a pickle trying to fill positions. So that's part of the whole posting and interview idea. Victoria says, no, it is not reasonable to ignore the submitted questions. Many parents spent a great deal of time on those questions so that the board would have time to answer them completely. Please answer those questions. And how am I going to answer the questions, the other 208 questions of the people who are submitting? I mean, we can alternate or we could do something like that. I don't know, but
we've had to ask these questions because they won't read
maybe
just
do that, Patty. Maybe alternate back and forth.
I mean, I'm scrolling through and just kind of along that questions line, just in the interest of time, we can kind of consolidate a lot of themes that we see here. A lot of themes I'm seeing are, why haven't the board been able to respond to every parent email that has already been sent? Why were the replies to those emails variations on copy and paste responses? Why aren't people allowed to speak their voice in this meeting instead of having to submit questions through the chat? There's a lot of frustration clearly from folks who want answers, have a lot of questions. And so I'm sure we can address that briefly, but just want to make sure people know that we hear it and we get it. Like there's a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty. People want their voice to be heard, and they want a robust and thorough response from the board.
Sure. Okay, so the first question from the parents' submission was, who determines the salaries at Baxter Academy and how are they decided? So, Kelly, do you want me to take this, or do Peter, me, you, whatever?
Head out and I'll help as needed.
Sure. So the salary scale was established long before I joined the organization. Teachers or employees who join the school are their experience, both their education, their teaching experience, and their applicable non-teaching traditional teaching experience, but applicable to what they may be teaching at Baxter, is calculated into where they land on the salary scale. And